Okay, this is going on page 81 when we're done. Well, maybe. 81 when we're done. There we go. Okie dokie. So you have the unit circle here. Some of the stuff is already filled in for you. The degrees are on here, really just as for a reference. If you don't know what the radians are you filling stuff in? Okay. Okay. It's okay. All right, just stop. I'm not going to ask you what are the radians for 210 degrees. I mean, no, you're probably not going to be asked that like ever. If you are, you can figure it out. It's not something you need to know, okay? Do you need to know for these three in the first quadrant? Yes, and I think we do. I don't think that that's a problem. And I'm not going to ask you for the cosine of 210. Nobody's going to ask you for that stuff. Now, with that said, in Delta Math, which is where your assignment is, they like to tell you on these, and I love Delta Math, they have some great explanations, but this is where they go off a little bit to me. They say take your radians, convert them to degrees, and then do this. Do not do that. You are making your life harder, and that is bad, okay? Nobody's going to ask you to do that. You don't need to know those degrees. If you do for one random thing here or there, you could figure them out and convert, but that is not what we're doing with this. So this is a time where I'm going to tell you the questions in Delta Math are great, the answers are correct. Their process, no bueno. I can't believe, I've been waiting for somebody else for years to complain and be the crazy person, and I'm surprised people haven't. So, anyway, but it's fine. It's still a good resource. I love it. So, anyway, so we're going to do this a little bit at a time. 30 degrees. So that one you should know, right? The conversions. What is that in radians? Pi what? Pi 6. Pi 6. That is the angle. The angle is pi 6. Okay? So I have a pi 6th angle in each quadrant. What do you think my second quadrant, without looking at anything, what is my second quadrant pi 6th angle? Anybody remember how to do that? Okay, because I talked you through all this stuff and remember I told you to think fractionally and your brains were like overflowing with stuff and it made your brain hurt? So if I'm thinking of pi 6, when I get here, this is pi, right? So this is 6 pi 6. If I back up one, what am I at? 5 pi 6. There we go. Okay? So then what is your third quadrant pi 6th angle? 7 pi 6. Yes? And then fourth quadrant? 11. This would be 6, so this would be 12, so I back up and I'm at 11. And all of the pi 6th angles are the ones that are closest to the x-axis. So we always go from the x-axis, and then you just either go up or down, and that's how you figure out where you are, okay? I mean, you can also just kind of know what it looks like, but most of us, that's not how our brains work. So this is going to help the great majority of people. And all right, so then let's look at, so let me ask you this then. What is the cosine of pi 6? What's the cosine of pi 6? Square root of 3 over 2. What is the sine of pi 6? 1/2. Okay? Good job. So what is the cosine of 5 pi 6? Negative square root of 3 over 2. And what's the sine of 5 pi 6? Positive 1/2, right? Because in the second quadrant, x is negative, y is positive, right? So what's the cosine of 7 pi 6? Negative square root of 3 over 2 and negative 1/2. Good. So then 11 pi 6, what's the cosine? Good, positive, and then negative 1/2. Okay? So if I ask you for the cosine of 25 pi 6, there's something you know. You can narrow it down to two things. It's either square root of 3 over 2 or negative square root of 3 over 2. Would you agree with that? 25 pi 6, wherever that is. And then if you can figure out what quadrant that would land in, then you would know if it's positive or negative, right? So that's kind of where we're going with this. We're not going to have a whole lot that are like 25 pi 6, but I just want you to think about that. We'll talk about it a little more as we go in there. But remember all the patterns and the reflections that are happening here. Okay, so 45 degrees, what is that in radians? Pi 4ths, okay. So then what do you think my second quadrant pi 4ths angle is? 3 pi 4ths. This would be 4 pi 4ths here, so then 3 pi 4ths. So then what do you think about your third quadrant angle? 5. 4 plus 1 is 5. Okay, 5 pi fourths. Yes. This is 4 pi fourths, right? If I go forward 1, that gets me to 5. Plus, think about this, because I heard 6 pi fourths somewhere. If I actually have 6 pi fourths of something, what does that reduce to? 3 pi halves, right? And that's a completely different angle. So yeah, I can keep counting for the 6's all around, but some of them reduce, right? These don't reduce here, so just ignore that. All right, so then what do you think your fourth quadrant pi fourths angle is? 7 pi fourths. Very good. All right, what is the cosine of pi fourths? Square root of 2 over 2. And sine? Square root of 2 over 2. Can you fill in the other pi fourths? Of course, go for it. Okay, everybody good so far? All right, what is 60 degrees in radians? Pi thirds, good. Okay, pi thirds. So, what is going on?
I messed up big.
Okay, did you fix it?
Well, the test is already
Oh, you messed up on the test. I got you. It's okay. It's not the end of the world.
smooth brain.
It happens. Happens to the best of us. All right.
I got 100.
What do you think our second quadrant pi thirds angle is? 2 pi thirds. Good. All right. And then what about third quadrant? 4 pi thirds. And fourth? 5 pi thirds. Okay. Everybody good with that? Because this would be 6 pi thirds, and we back up 1. Just always go from the x-axis up or down, and you're good. Okay? All right. What is the cosine of pi thirds? 1/2. Sine? Square root of 3 over 2. All right. So fill in the rest of it. And then stop after you're finished with the pi thirds. Don't fill in anything else. I know that bright green is kind of hard to read, but I was trying to get the pattern thing in there, so I won't use it for a whole lot of things, but it's easier to read when it's like printed out. But anyway, so you understand how the patterns of the reflections happen. Hopefully that all kind of came from our triangles. But then I want you to look at something else. I want you to look at the 3 angles we have in the second quadrant and ignore the pi for a minute. And if I ignore the pi, how are the numerator and denominator of each one related? In the second quadrant, these fractions, ignore the pi's, just the pi itself, pretend like it's not there. Yeah, the numerator is 1 less than the denominator for all 3 of those. Would you agree with that? What's happening in the third quadrant? It's 1 more. That's because we come here and then either back up 1 or go forwards 1, right? So when I ask you what quadrant is 2 pi thirds in, there's a few things that could go through your mind. Maybe you just know, because there'll be a person or two that they just know. It's fine. Or that 2 pi thirds, okay, then you can think the numerator is 1 less than the denominator. That means it's in the second quadrant. Or you can think, all right, this is 3 pi thirds, and then I back up and I'm there. Like whatever works for you. It's not going to take you 5 minutes to think it, but it's still like a little process for your brain. Okay, but I wanted you to see those patterns in there too. So, because when I ask you things, you don't want to have to write out this entire circle. Writing out the first quadrant's not that big of a deal, but it still takes time, right? But you don't want to have to write out the entire circle if I ask you what is the cosine of 7 pi 6, just so you can come pick this off, right? So I'm going to help you with how to get that after we finish these up real quick. All right, so then let's do the 4 that we have left off. This is 0. What is this angle here? Pi halves. It's not undefined, it is pi halves. What is this one? It's okay. Pi. Okay. Then what is 270? 3 pi over 2, because look, 1 pi half, 2 pi halves, 3 pi halves. And then this is 4 pi halves, which is 2 pi. Okay? All right, so then what is the cosine of 0? 1. What is the sine of 0? 0. What is the cosine of pi halves? 0. What is the sine? 1. What is the cosine of pi? Anyway, I'm sorry. It's not nice to laugh at you. I'm not laughing at the fact that you got them wrong. You're just a funny person. I don't know. What's the sine of pi? 0. All right. 3 pi halves. What's the cosine? 0. And the sine? -1. Okay. All right. We good? You're going to be fine. All right. One more thing we need to look at here. Look at, in the first quadrant, sine and cosine are positive. So what does that tell you about tangent? It's also positive. Okay. So we're going to put an A in the first quadrant because they're all positive. Okay. In the second quadrant, cosine's negative, sine is positive. What does that tell you about tangent? It's negative. So the only thing that's positive here is sine. So we're going to put an S for sine. Okay? Third quadrant, sine and cosine are both negative. What does that tell you about tangent? It's positive. So there's a T here. And then the fourth quadrant, what's the only thing that's positive? Cosine, yes. All right, so if I ask you what is the cosine of pi 6, that's something you should be able to give to me pretty quickly. If I ask you for the cosine of shut up. If I ask you for the cosine of 7 pi 6, that may not come out as quickly, but here's what you want to think about. Okay, you want to think about, well, all right, 7 pi 6, what quadrant is that in? That's in the third quadrant. And then in the third quadrant, is cosine positive or negative? Well, you know it's tangent that's positive, so cosine's negative, which is going to make it that negative square root of 3 over 2. So there's like a couple little steps that you think through each time, and we don't have to exactly write all this. So to remember the order of this, or just think about how ordered pairs work, that works too. The little saying is all students take calculus. I've also heard San Antonio's teachers conference, but I don't like that because that doesn't go in the order of the quadrants. But all students take calculus. All right? So that's how you remember which quadrant everything is positive in. Does that help? And I'm going to show you how to use that. We okay on that so far? Okay. So let's scroll to the bottom before we move on. So we just said that in quadrant 1, they are all positive. What is positive in quadrant 2? Sine. Sine and its reciprocal. What's the reciprocal of sine? Cosecant, yes. Cosecant. Remember, each pair has one co in it. All right, quadrant 3, what's positive? Tangent and what? Cotangent, good. Quadrant 4 is cosine and what? What's the reciprocal of cosine? Secant, good. Okay. Everybody good with all that so far? Yes? All right.
How do you see the bottom one again?
Secant?
No, the bottom.
Cosine? Cosine theta, secant theta? Okay. All right, so our trig values. Now we know that sine is y. You were answering that over and over again, but that's only when it's a unit circle. In general, it is actually y over r, but in this case, the r is just 1. So sine is y over r. That means cosine is x over r. And then tangent is y over x, but I also want you to write sine theta over cosine theta, because I want you need to be able to think about it that way too. Okay. Well, it kind of already should be, but yes. All right, so cosecant is the reciprocal of what? Sine, so this is r over y. Secant is r over x. And cotangent is x over y.
Cosine over sin.
Sine. Okay. We all good on all those? All right. So then I want you to flip this face down because I don't want you actually looking at it while we go through the rest of this stuff. Uh-huh.
What does R stand for?
Radius. Okay. Oh. This is going on page 82 when we're done. And some of this is a repeat of not exactly the exact same questions, or maybe it is. I don't know, but it doesn't remember because, it doesn't remember. It doesn't matter because you're not going to remember exactly. But we've talked about reference angles and we've graphed these angles. But when we did that was on the day that we talked about radians. And then I was asking you what quadrant a radian was in, and you looked at me like I was crazy, but I was trying to force you out of your comfort zone. This is going to be much better for you this time. Okay, that's why we're doing it again. So 2 pi thirds. First of all, what quadrant is 2 pi thirds in? 2. Okay. Now, in order for me to get a semi-accurate graph, I want to think about the actual measure. What is pi thirds in degrees? 60. So 2 pi thirds is 120, right? Because I just double it. So 120 would be about right here. Just so I can kind of get it accurate. So this is theta, which is 2 pi thirds. And then we're going to graph our reference angle. What Greek letter did we use for our reference angle? It's the A. What's it? This bad Jesus fish. Yes, it's alpha. Okay. He said the fish. All right. It's all right. Means you're paying attention. So what is what's the reference angle here? How much more do I have to go to get to the axis? Okay, wouldn't this be 3 pi thirds? So if I got to 2 pi thirds, I got to go, it's just another pi thirds, right? Yeah, because 2 pi thirds plus pi thirds is 3 pi thirds. It gets me to pi. Yeah. You have to put them together, you get the whole thing. All right, we good on that? 11 pi 6, what quadrant is that in? Fourth, good. And then pi 6 is what in degrees? Pi 6? 30. So that means I'm about 30 away. That's just to help me get a semi-decent drawing here. So this is theta, which is 11 pi 6. So then my reference angle, think about I went all the way and I had to back up how much? Pi 6. Mm-hmm. No. All right, negative 5 pi fourths. What quadrant would that be in?
That would be 3.
5 pi fourths would be in the third quadrant. Negative 5 pi fourths, because I got to go the other way. So if I go this way, this is negative 4 pi fourths, and then I got to go one more, right?
Yeah, I can go negative.
Okay, so this is negative 5 pi fourths. So what is alpha? Don't overthink it. It's just pi fourths. Okay? Now look, if these were degrees on this first one, because we said we know it's 120, I'd have to do 180 minus 120 to get 60. On these others, I'd have to do some other subtracting of other random numbers. Here, for our special angles that we're using, they are more than obvious. What's the reference angle for 25 pi thirds? Pi thirds, okay? That is your reference angle, okay? So you don't have to overthink it. There's no really thinking to go with it. You just got to get the other angle in the right quadrant, okay? We good on that? All right, 5 pi 6, what quadrant is that in? 5 is less than 6, so I haven't even gotten to pi yet. 6 pi 6, I back up 1. 5 pi 6 is right there. All right, so then what's my reference angle? Pi 6. Okay. We good so far? All right, you graph the other two on your own. Oh, you can do it. Okay. Uh-huh. Yeah. Do you leave something in there?
Yeah.
Just make sure the door's locked when you leave it. Okay, and then this would be 5. Okay. Remember, we can have an angle that goes around more than once. I'm gonna ask you random things about stuff like 25 pi thirds, but I'm not gonna have you make you draw it and do all the little circles or anything. Okay. You're welcome. Oh, that's important. Oh my God. Uh-huh. All right. We all good on these? Yes? We can graph these? Okay, perfect. Okay, so now we are going to use some of those same skills to come up with these things without drawing the entire circle. And like I said, I don't want you looking at the circle. We're going to get it out of our brains. You got plenty of brain power in there to make that happen. And we're going to write stuff down, and everything I write down, I want you to write down because I want it in your notes. When you get really good at this, or even after you're done with these notes, you don't necessarily always have to write it all, but it'll be good for you to have a process there and for you to remember what you have to think through. So if I want the sign of 2 pi thirds, the first thing you're going to ask yourself is, what quadrant is 2 pi thirds in? What is it? Second. Okay. So then the second thing you ask yourself is sign positive or negative in the second quadrant? It's positive, because remember, it's all students take calculus. All right, so it's positive. All right, so then I just have to say, all right, what's the sign of pi thirds? What's the sign of pi thirds? Pi thirds. I just want one. It's square root 3 over 2. Square root 3 over 2. Okay? We good? All right. Cosine of 5 pi fourths. What quadrant is 5 pi fourths in? 3. Okay. Is cosine positive or negative in the third? Negative. So my answer is a negative something. What is the cosine of pi fourths? Square root of 2 over 2. Okay? All right, tangent of 11 pi 6. What quadrant is 11 pi 6 in? Fourth. Okay. In the fourth quadrant, is tangent positive or negative? Negative. So this is a negative something. What's the tangent of pi sixths? Square root of 3 over 3. So my answer is a negative square root of 3 over 3. All right? Sine of negative 2 pi thirds. What quadrant is negative 2 pi thirds in? Third. So we are in the third quadrant. Is sine positive or negative? Negative. So my answer is negative something, and then all I've got to worry about is the sine of pi thirds, which is square root of 3 over 2. Okay? Everybody okay with those? Do you see how it all goes back to the first quadrant? We all are all little first quadrant experts now. So if we can just relate the rest of the circle to the first quadrant, you got it down, okay? All right, now let's look at these quadrantal angles, because this was on our other notes as well. Quadrantal. So if I ask you what quadrant is pi halves in, it's not, right? So you can't just say it's not and be done with it. It's a quadrantal angle, and you would need to know that it is on the positive y-axis so that you can think about what that ordered pair is, okay? So sometimes the answer to what quadrant it's in is it's not, it's a quadrantal, and then we go from there, okay? We good? All righty, let's move on. Flip it over. So we're repeating some of this again, okay? And we wrote this on the other piece of paper a minute ago, but we wrote it down for any circle. This is talking specifically about a unit circle, so I have a radius of 1. So if sine is y over r and r is 1, then sine is just plain old y when we're just talking about the unit circle, which means cosine is plain old x. Tangent is what? Y over x, which means it's also sine over cosine still, right? What would cosecant be? 1 over y. Good. Secant would be 1 over x, and cotangent would be x over y. Okay? All right, so then this coordinate P, this point right here, my radius is 1, and here's my angle, here's the ordered pair. It's x, y, but we know that we can write it as cosine theta, sine theta. I think you got that part down for sure. I hope, anyway. It's in alphabetical order, just like x and y, so no biggie. Okay. Then we have, so then unit circle. And I left this information on here mainly just because it has the word map in it. And I think when we use the word map in math, people get a little confused. It's not like a map of the United States. We're mapping numbers or one thing onto, you can map a figure onto another. If you have a function, you're mapping x onto y, that sort of thing. So it's frequently used to map pi sixths, pi fourths, and pi thirds. And their multiples, so like 2 pi thirds, 5 pi sixths, blah, blah, blah. As well as the quadrantals, which would be 0, pi halves, pi, 3 pi halves, and so forth and so on. So we're mapping those onto ordered pairs, which give us our sine and cosine values. So that's just kind of what that vocabulary is there. Well, what is 6 pi halves reduced to? 3 pi. So you wouldn't have 6 pi halves, you'd have 3 pi. All right, so now we're going to do basically the same thing we did on the front. We're going to do a few together, and then I'm going to have you all help me individually with the rest. So sine of 3 pi fourths. So what quadrant is 3 pi fourths in? 2. And in the second quadrant, is sine positive or negative? It is. All students take calculus. You know, you write SOHCAHTOA at the top of stuff. You might want to have this jotted down so you have something to refer to quickly. So in the second quadrant, sine is positive. So then what's the sine of pi fourths? Square root of 2 over 2. Good. All right, the cosine of pi, what quadrant is pi in? It's a quadrantal. So I'm just going to put a Q for quadrantal. And at pi, what's the ordered pair? Negative 1, 0. Good. So then what's the cosine? Negative 1. Okay. So really all you have to write is your answer when you're, again, on your notes, I want you writing it out. If you need to jot that stuff down, that's fine. But if you're asked for a cosine of pi, this is just kind of the thinking process you go through, and then that's really your answer there. All right, tangent of negative 5 pi thirds. What quadrant is negative 5 pi thirds in? Okay, we're here at 0. We're going this way. Negative 3 pi thirds, negative 6 pi thirds, negative 5 pi thirds is back here. So we are in quadrant 1, where everything is positive. And what's the tangent of pi thirds? Square root of 3. Okay? They're not going to ask you something like that on the AP exam. All right. Let's look. So now I'm going to have, and when I'm recording, I can't use my, it doesn't let me switch through windows. I haven't figured out why. Because now that I don't have, I either fight with the box, the stupid box that I'm always moving, or I don't get to move things. So, all right. So I'm going to ask you, now if you can't just tell me the answer, that's fine. I don't want you to just tell me the answer. I'm going to ask you the questions that we've been doing together, okay? So we're going to start with Karime. So tell me, sine of 2 pi thirds, what quadrant is 2 pi thirds in? Second one, very good. And in the second quadrant, is sine positive or negative? Positive, good. So then what is the sine of pi thirds? Square root of 3 over 2, very good. Thank you very much. All right, David. What is, tangent of 3 pi halves. What quadrant is 3 pi halves in? It's not in a quadrant. What is the ordered pair? Okay, draw yourself, you're doing good. Draw yourself a little sketch, it's fine. When you say it's over here, are you saying it's right here? Are you saying it's right here? Yeah. Yeah. What's that ordered pair?
That's negative 1, 0.
0, negative 1. Okay. So then what is the tangent? How could you find the tangent if you don't just know? It's what over what?
It's y over x.
Okay, so if you put y over x, what's that going to give you? What's
Oh, wait.
negative 1 divided by 0?
Negative 1 divided by
What, it's undefined. Okay, good job. You can't write that it's nothing. It is undefined. Okay, good. So let's talk about tangent real quick, because that one was tougher than the rest. Thank you for doing it. We know that this is undefined and this is 0, because we've done a lot with the first quadrant, right? Well, this is 0 because it's 0 over 1. This would be 0 over negative 1, so this is 0 also. This is undefined because it's 1 over 0. This becomes negative 1 over 0, so that's undefined. So they're just at opposite ends of the axis of each other, okay? So you don't have to really figure it out every single time. Okie dokie. Mariana, cosine of negative 5 pi 6. What quadrant is negative 5 pi 6 then? The third. And then the third quadrant is cosine positive or negative? Negative, good. So it's a negative something. What's cosine of pi 6? Very good. Square root of 3 over 2. Okay, we all good so far? All right. Jacob, cosine of 3 pi 4. What quadrant is that in? The second. All right. Second quadrant, is this positive or negative? Negative. All right. So negative something. What's the cosine of pi 4? Square root of 2 over 2. Very good. Everybody good with all that so far? All righty. Genesis, tangent of 2 pi thirds. What quadrant is 2 pi thirds in? Second. Very good. Positive or negative? Negative. Good. And then what's the tangent of pi thirds? Very good. Square root of 3. Just 1 3 for that 3. Thank you. Alphen, tangent of pi halves. What quadrant is that in? It's quadrantal, okay. And what's the ordered pair? 0, 1. All right, and what's the tangent? Undefined. Okay, very good. Thank you. Fabian, cosine of negative pi fourths. What quadrant is negative pi fourths in? 4. Good. Cosine positive or negative? All students take calculus. Positive, yeah, good. All right, so it's positive, and what's the cosine of pi fourths? Good, square root of 2 over 2. Very good. Thank you. Ryan, tangent of 5 pi fourths. What quadrant is 5 pi fourths in? Third, good. Is tangent positive or negative? Positive, good. And then what is the tangent of pi fourths? Very good, thank you. Last but not least, Sophia, sine of negative 5 pi 6. What quadrant is negative 5 pi 6 in? Very good. So the third quadrant, is it positive or negative then? Negative, good. So it's negative something. What's the sign of pi 6? 1/2. You got it. Very good, guys. So do you understand the process there then? You see how if you know the first quadrant, you got the rest down. It's not that big of a deal. It looks very overwhelming. I know it does, but you already know it and you're good. All right?